Conversations with GIPR, which is the stock symbol for Generation Income Properties, is the only podcast hosted by a CEO of a public net lease REIT. While there is plenty of information and analytical data to help you understand the net lease REIT sector, I take a look at what it takes to grow a company and ask our guests some of the tough questions on how they did the same. If you're interested in learning more about just what you can find in a spreadsheet, Conversations with GIPR may be for you.
David Sobelman is the CEO for Generation Income Properties. All opinions expressed by David or any guest of Conversations with GIPR are solely opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the company. Any remarks in this podcast, other than purely historical information, may include forward-looking statements and as such are subject to the risks and uncertainties that are discussed in our SEC filings, and actual results may vary materially from those suggested in any forward-looking statements. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions.
Welcome to Conversations with GIPR. I'm here today with someone who is a very unique specimen in his own right, and something a little bit different for our listeners today. It's Mike Campagnolo, and he has a very eclectic background. And we were just talking beforehand on how to introduce him. We don't even know what to say anymore because he has recently sold his company. But that's really the reason you're sitting here, is since from 1992 to, was it 2024?
Yeah, exactly.
You essentially had the same job.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had a lot in between, but yeah.
And just for the listeners today, we have a little different venue. We're in Sarasota, Florida, which is just south of Tampa, Florida, where our headquarters are. And this is where Mike lives. And we thought we would change where we normally visit, not just to accommodate Mike, but for him to experience the podcast experience and to let him be less nervous than he may be right now.
Home court advantage.
Yeah. So, we're a public company. We're big into transparency. I think it's always interesting for listeners to hear how we met, because we're also big on relationships too. It's one of our core values as a company, is to be relational, and not just for business purposes, but for life purposes. And I'm sure we can get into all the different relationships that you've had in your career and how they've turned into friendships and business, right? But ultimately, Mike and I met through a friend who's also been on our podcast, Henry Taylor. For the listeners, to remind the listeners, he was the, in Mike's words, the physical specimen, extremely well educated and read, not just well educated, but well read, mutual friend of ours, who's currently running a franchise in the fitness industry called Rumble. Why don't you tell me how you met Henry?
So I met Henry through his parents, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I happened to, when I relocated to Sarasota from Indianapolis back in about 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
I happened to move next door to his mom, and lovely woman. And we just instantly became, friends, and his dad as well, Robert. And so they lived right next to me, and my little boy is 10 now, but at the time he was about 6, and he fell in love with Edith, and Edith likewise with Mateo. So Mateo would just run outside. I'm going to Edith's, and go over to Edith's house. Next thing you know, I'm like, all right, go ahead, bud. Next thing you know, he's knocking on the door, and she answers the door. They're having dinner. They're hanging out. He's eating chips or whatever he's doing.
Without you there.
Yeah, without me there.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's how the instant connection was from day one.
Right.
And then I got introduced to Henry and his siblings, and the relationship just blossomed from there. And it's been quite beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
To have someone right next door to you that you really like and just respect and have a great relationship with.
Yeah, that's neat. So And you were both fairly new to the neighborhood also. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Henry was there maybe a couple of years before I was when they finally moved into their house.
Yeah. Right. So everyone's like, I don't know anyone here. I don't know anyone here. Let's be friends.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yep. Like I know no one in Sarasota. Now I do.
That's great. Okay. So how did you find out that now we're getting into your current life? And I was talking to Mike before this and I was like, how do you want me to introduce you? And he's like, I don't know. Like, and I said, should I say you're retired? And you're like, no, it's because I play golf.
It's like a job.
In fact, so full disclosure, Mike and I played golf together 2 weeks ago.
Right.
2 weeks ago. And you had told me that it was your 5th day in a row playing golf. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And now we're approaching 25 days and 23 days and 25, past 25. So yeah, I'm sore.
So this is your day off.
This is my day off. Actually, I took the weekend off. I did. I took Saturday and Sunday off and trying to recover.
That's really funny. Okay. So what do you do before golf? So I mentioned 1992. So let's bring the audience back to that. You were how old?
I was 21.
Okay.
And I was actually, I don't know if you know this even, I was a cop at the time. Did you know that? No. Okay. So I started out in law enforcement. So I got out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. You're either in construction, you're going to college like Henry did in the traditional path, work, mob, whatever.
Right.
You're doing all those different components in New York City. You had a lot going on in the 80s. And you had all these choices.
Right. And because it is a choice.
It is a choice. Yeah. That and police and fire.
Right.
And I was kind of like, all right. So I took the test. I decided to do that.
You were 18 when you did
this. I was 19.
19.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I took it at 18 and I think I started at 19. And, but I knew pretty much quickly right thereafter that wasn't really what my path was. I always wanted to be in business, but didn't know how or what the path was going to be like to get to that point. And I wasn't the scholarly type like some others, namely.
Yeah, Henry.
I won't name Henry. I'll name Henry. All right, I'll name Henry.
Right. Harvard.
Yeah, Harvard. Harvard.
Right.
He barely spell Harvard.
Yeah.
But he's went there. So I decided to take that path and work. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to kind of get into business. And we were going to the local gym in town in Jersey City. And a best buddy of mine at the time, we came on the job together, went to the police academy together, and he was dating a girl that was the sister of the owner of the gym. And he was in his 40s, a chiropractor, and he had a chiropractic office and a gym.
The owner.
The owner,
right?
Yeah. And he was retired.
Not your friend.
No, not my friend. We were both young and had nothing. Yeah, we had no money, nothing. So he was retiring or moving. I can't remember what it was. He was either retiring or moving to the West Coast, out in California or something. And he was going to sell his business, chiropractic and fitness. So I said, Joe, why don't we buy it? Neither one of us had a pot to
dime.
Right.
Yeah.
So we both borrowed all the money, scraped it all together, and bought this gym together.
So that's an interesting component because capital raising is hard. And so you had no money. So how did you raise that money as a 20-year-old, right?
Yeah. And literally it was from 100% borrowed money, honestly. And it was all friends and family, including a teacher that believed in me in high school that I stayed connected with through the years and still dear friend.
Wow.
So all these little connection points that I had is, hey, I'm looking to do this and, I need XYZ. And so we both scraped together all the money that we could. And then we went to the equipment company and somehow talked them into assigning the lease for all the equipment to us with with nothing.
Right.
So personal guarantees didn't matter because I didn't have anything. So I signed away everything.
Sure, I'll sign here. Yeah, great.
Yeah, exactly. So somehow they believed in us and said yes. And then we were off to running. We were off running. And I ran that for about 8 years. And Joe
the one location.
The one location,
right?
Yep. And then my partner at the time ended up getting a different job in law enforcement that required a lot more time. So I ended up buying the business from him, his half, about 9 months later. He got this big job somewhere and decided to do that. So I said, Joe, I don't have any money. He said, all right, I'll give you a note. So now I got everything.
Really?
Yeah. So I had to
just
take all
leverage,
everything. And believe it or not, I think it was 9 months later, I had all the notes paid off.
So 18 total months.
18 total months. I was debt free, except for the equipment loan.
Right.
And off to the races. Yeah.
Are you comfortable talking about the numbers? Because I think the context is really interesting for people.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Right.
this is again going back into
Mhm.
91 to 92,
Mhm.
and the total debt was about 100,000,
Mhm.
which is about as well 100 million to me. It
Right.
was a lot, including equipment and loans and everything
Uh-huh.
else. Somewhere in that range, 75 to 100.
Right.
But that was a lot, for me.
And then you had to negotiate the value of the location with your friend, right? To buy
That's
them
right.
out.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and we just negotiated basically the initial note, what
Mhm.
we had originally paid in a little vig or
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
just something on top.
So you
And,
knew what the word vig was as a
Yeah.
21-year-old.
that I did. Growing outside New York City, I kind of hear these. Yeah, you get accustomed to these certain words.
I'm sorry, I'm like cracking up. Like, I can just envision like young Mike. He's like, all right, what's the vig? Right? You owe me the vig.
Yeah. How many points is this going to cost me?
That's so great. All right. So sign the note.
Yep.
I'm sure it wasn't like super formal, halfway
Mhm.
formal, because you had some business acumen at that point.
Yeah, we did
right?
it all above board, legal, got the legal docs done, and did all that. Signed the whole lease back over to me,
Right.
for the 10-year period at least that we signed in,
Uh-huh.
and so then it was all on me.
Okay,
Yeah,
how does that feel?
Do or die. It was great. It was liberating, to be honest. Look back then, it wasn't a weight that you would think. And a lot of people today, I think, have a fear of debt, one, and a fear of taking chances. And I was young. I knew I could recover from whatever happened. Some way it would be okay. It was more important to follow a path of what I thought was for me, rather than what someone else set out for me or thought I should or shouldn't be doing at a certain point in time.
Did you know that then, or is that in hindsight?
No, I knew that then. I can confidently say I knew that then, or felt that then. A lot of books I read were, even though I wasn't scholarly like Henry, probably read every business book I can think of under the sun at the time. So I was very, I read a lot. So, and everything I read pointed to taking those chances, and happiness being a critical component underlying the reasons you make those decisions. So that's where my mindset has always been. So those decisions were really predicated on what would accomplish that goal, not so much a financial gain, even though it was you do it to make money as a primary source of income, but that can't be the primary driver, if that makes sense in my eyes. I think that could be a recipe for a lot of failure in business, and maybe why a lot of failed businesses do fail. The goals aren't aligned with what's inside, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's getting deeper than I wanted to at this stage.
Okay.
I want to go there.
Okay.
but you're starting us off there.
We can pivot. We can pivot wherever you want to go.
So we're big readers here. We actually have a book club, the GIPR book club. And so do you remember any of the books that you read back then that kind of give you the motivation to do this?
So many. Back then, it was Tony Robbins was big on the scene then. So it was a lot of stuff with Tony Robbins. Went to a couple seminars at the time. As a Man Thinketh, Think and Grow Rich. All of the books of that genre that I read. So it was endless from those kind of things,
that's really cool. All right, we'll sidebar later on the books because this will go deep, right?
Yeah.
All right, so for 8 years, you ran one location.
Yes.
And it was doing well. It was successful. You were growing, the business, right? You're growing your wealth, right? You're like, oh, this works.
Yeah.
And then what was the inflection point in that one location where you're like, I need to have 2 locations?
It actually wasn't an inflection point at that time. It was an inflection point of changing careers as a whole. So being able to create enough, quote unquote, wealth to be able to change careers from the law enforcement side
Mm-hmm.
and focus fully on business
Mm-hmm.
and real estate at the time. So I was involved in real estate too at the time, residential.
Mm-hmm.
So I was confident enough that I can leave the security
Mm-hmm.
of pension, healthcare, et cetera, steady job,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and leave that security for the kind of unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think, the inflection point,
Mm-hmm.
and selling it and then going on my own and saying, I'll figure this out somehow without a real crystal clear plan.
Okay. So I think you skipped over a part. So
Okay.
you sold.
I did.
You did.
I did. Yeah. I
And
sold that.
you sold
Mm-hmm.
the fitness center
Mm-hmm.
and you quit law enforcement.
I did.
In what time frame?
At the same time. So it was all kind of calculated, I think, when I knew I'd be able to have that exit of that first business.
Right.
And I was confident I would have that, to be able to rely on to, use it for other means to create more wealth, hopefully. And then also find what my true path was in business and that. So then I relocated to Boston, wanted to go on Henry's path and finish school.
Right.
I was on the 9-year college plan.
one degree.
And Henry was on the 9-day plan. I was on the 9-year plan.
True.
So as I was running the business in law enforcement, I was also going to college part-time.
Yeah, that's
class
great.
here, class there, cost and
terrific.
time.
Yeah.
And then I focused full-time after I left law enforcement, sold the business, focused full-time, and then went on a 2-year plan, finished the schooling in 2 years up in Boston. And that's where I then saw the next iteration of business with Planet Fitness.
Okay, so you just blew the big surprise.
Jeez.
You just like that was my line.
Hold on, stop, rewind. Okay, replay. Mike, so.
All right, Mike, Planet Fitness. Let's get into it. All right, so you graduate college and you find an opportunity in Planet Fitness, and that's really, I would say, like kind of why we're sitting here today, because that was the biggest portion of your professional career, right? Mm-hmm. And insofar as, can you tell everyone the name in your franchisee, to be clear? Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And so what was the name of your franchise company?
We originally named it Planet Fit Indy. Yeah, Planet Fit Indy 10, because that was the original geography that Indianapolis, the original geography that I secured when I went out.
And you had 10 locations?
10 locations at the time.
So does that mean you bought 10 locations or you had rights to 10 locations?
I had rights to 10.
Okay.
So there was none in the state.
Zero.
Zero. Yeah. I was supposed to be 1 through 10. Yeah. With this unproven model.
So a lot of our listeners, they're real estate people, they're franchise people. And then of course we're going to talk about the blend of the two, because that's a big deal for a lot of franchisees is just where they occupy their locations, or their operations. Sorry. And so, understanding the franchisee's mindset is really important, because that goes, for our world, the real estate world, it goes into the valuation of the real estate. It goes into like, who's occupying your building? And then you think of it like, how can I reduce my operating expenses so much that I should own or lease, right? Like those are the discussion points for yourself. So when you're going into the franchise model itself, explain to everyone why. Like, why'd you choose that path?
So the franchise model, as I believed it to be at the time, was very, and I still do, it could be a very powerful way of getting into a business, especially for all the systems they have in place. You're really buying into the franchisor for their expertise in the brand, what they're building, and their systems that they have in place. How much can they support you? What is that support going to be? How are they going to help you grow to the next level and have the system as a whole grow at the same time? So in theory, if it works, and it did with the Planet model, if the franchisees all grow together and expand together and the franchisor is strong, then the whole system then grows at the same time. And you get exponential growth that way. And that's a huge component of it for why I looked into the franchise model, for the scalability of it, and for not having to do it alone. So if somebody comes up with an idea and you didn't have that idea, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You can now partner with someone that has that idea
Mm-hmm.
and then expand and grow together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was luckily early on enough that it was in the beginning of the system, so to speak, 4 or 5 years in. And it wasn't super proven. That's the part of the risk component.
Mm-hmm.
But as I spoke to earlier, I'm kind of not averse to risk. So that part didn't bother me much.
Right.
But it's important, I think, to highlight, because I don't want people to think you just go into a franchise system and it's an automatic win, and it's not.
Right. You got to work your butt off.
You got to work your butt off, and you got to
Right.
really research and make sure that,
Mm-hmm.
that who you're partnering with is the right partner for you.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's how that worked.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fortunate in that sense.
Did you look at other concepts in fitness?
I did, yeah, quite a few,
Right.
especially being in the business before that.
Right.
A lot of the other models, and Planet came up with something that was just so unique at the time. They changed the industry, in retail in general.
Uh-huh.
Now Planet Fitness is a major attraction to any retail center. Where before, fitness was not something you'd want into this to the parking lots, right? You're driving traffic, lots of cars. It's a heavy user of parking,
Mm-hmm.
and so it wasn't looked well upon from the landlord side.
Mm-hmm.
That's changed now. Now we're as good as any retailer in any center.
You're a draw.
So they want you now,
Yeah.
as opposed to before. It was very hard to pick up the phone and talk to Kohl's or Best Buy or whoever and try and say yes. They'll sign off on an assignment or
Mm-hmm.
a lease or whatever it is. Now it's
Mhm.
different. Now it's so the whole industry's changed, and by de facto, it just kind of changed the real estate component too, as you know.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. We own both Kohl's and Best Buy.
Okay. So you know exactly what
we
I
didn't
mean.
set that up, by the way.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Right.
It was very hard for us to get into those centers.
Yeah.
We want centers with very heavy parking restriction
Right.
for the users.
That's really funny. Yeah. The parking lot at our Kohl's is like
Uh-huh.
acres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm like, whoa, there's
Yeah.
a lot of spaces here.
A lot of spaces.
So, so you bought the rights to 10, you bought a geography, which is super common. You were young, ambitious, and willing to relocate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the geography they had available for you.
That's
And so
right.
you went for it.
That's right.
You knew no one in Indianapolis.
I did actually,
Okay.
just from,
Right.
very loosely.
Right.
No one, and at the time everything was open from Pennsylvania, including New Jersey, I guess, and some other areas, all the way to Seattle. So I looked at everything in between there and Seattle, and,
Right.
and Portland, Oregon,
Right.
everything in between, because it was all open.
Right.
Pick of the litter at the time.
Uh-huh.
You could go anywhere.
Yeah.
There's nothing sold out. So,
That's right. And so you get to Indianapolis, you have this fitness business model, which is unique,
Mhm.
right? And the model is different because of pricing, right? Like that's what attracted you. Like they had a volume sort of model. Is that fair? I'm
it's
embarrassing
partly
my-
true.
I'm
No,
embarrassing
it's
myself, right?
partly true. No,
Okay.
it's partly true. The
Uh-huh.
model of $10 a month was now it's 15. It
Right.
just got changed for the first time.
Wow.
Of course,
Yeah.
after I leave, increase revenue automatically, $5, 50%. I'm a member, and here I'm out now. but in addition to the pricing, more importantly, was probably how what Planet did was they created a model that attracted the masses.
Mm.
So fitness in before that, it would be the top 15% of the population. 12 to 15% would belong to gyms and go to gyms,
Mhm.
and they were typically the healthy ones, the ones that would work out already, the ones that are in shape, the Henrys of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You go
They
into
know
a
what they're
gym,
doing.
they know what they're doing, and
Yeah.
you cater to the bodybuilders, the powerlifters, and athletes that are on high level.
Mhm.
You don't get a lot of beginners. If you do, they join and then quit. There's the revolving door.
Mhm.
That was what all of us struggled with. My gym as well,
Mhm.
including the gyms that Planet Fitness owned at the time.
Mhm.
We actually owned the gym at the same. They owned one gym when I owned my gym the same year. They opened theirs the same year I had mine, coincidentally.
Your first one.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So when I had one, they had one, and that was it. So we were both going to the same conferences,
Right.
same things to kind of grow our business. How do we figure out this secret sauce? What's the
Mhm.
secret sauce?
Mhm.
So we were all struggling with the same thing. But the founders of Planet Fitness came up with the idea of changing the model and then changing who our core customer is.
Mm.
So now core customer becomes, instead of that bodybuilder, powerlifter, fitness model, it's the everyday user, the other 85% of the population that just wants to be healthy and couldn't afford it, one, or knew that they belonged in a gym. So they created a whole mindset shift, a paradigm shift within fitness. And this changed the whole industry. The whole industry's changed because of this now.
What year was that roughly?
So they started in 92, and then they changed the model in the mid 90s to that, and then started franchising in 2003. So the model kind of got refined enough to franchise. I think it was 2003, and then I came on 5 years later. So when I saw that, it was an immediate understanding of the model because of the struggles I had. So I saw the struggles I had and dealt with, and I wasn't smart enough to come up with the idea that they came up with to figure it out, the answer. But then I was like, geez, I know right away that that's a great idea. So that's why I was able to be confident and say, I'm going to, relocate, find a location and start opening them.
Would it be fair to say, like, not only did they have the model, but they had the marketing machine, right? Like, and that's a big part of any retail establishment is, would you consider yourself a retailer almost?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
And they didn't at the time, though. It took them quite a while to get it enough where, luckily, we had enough people in the system early on that had businesses before and had some acumen and just some experience. So it wasn't a lot of new franchisees that just came in. It was conversions of like a Gold's Gym or a Powerhouse Gym.
I see.
So you had people that were in the industry that understood it, core group, and we were just off to the races. There was no real systems in place other than the POS and the purple and yellow and the equipment. Where do you get the equipment?
And they forced you to say, like, it's our equipment. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So
that's really common, though.
And that's common.
Right.
So for me, I already had the business side kind of nailed down for how to run a business. So I didn't need the systems that weren't in place already, and neither did the other owners in Planet. So we just kind of all went off and did our own thing, and collectively we had a very strong unit within the system, the franchisees. We talked all the time. We shared info, which isn't common, numbers, and all the things that you would think would be threatening to another franchisee. It wasn't to us. We were all like, we got to figure this out together. And that was one of the real major things that made Planet really unique and strong.
So you're really talking about leadership, the franchisor being the leader in this case, right? So you not only believed in them, but they were proving to you that their leadership and their direction, their guidance to you was something that you needed to invest in. And just the fact that franchisees are sharing with each other is not common, right?
It's not, no.
And so what was different about the franchisor that you felt comfortable saying, like, I'm going to commit my entire career to this one brand?
I think it was, meeting Chris Rondeau, who was the former CEO and one of the three founders. I went up to the corporate headquarters and met with him, and we immediately had an instant connection. Like, you meet somebody, sit across the table with them, you look in the eye, and you kind of know, this is going to work. This isn't going to work. Right from the beginning, we knew.
Especially being from New York. Like,
right.
You're like, I got it.
A little more of a sixth sense, so to speak,
Right.
And just, all the questions that I had, all the questions they had, it was a very thoughtful kind of unique conversation where it wasn't what's in it for me. It was more, how are we going to create this for us kind of thing. And they were so new that they needed the help too. So it was helpful for them to have people in the system that had expertise in a certain area, whatever it may be, whether it's marketing or business or opening gyms. So it was incredibly important for them to have that. And they had that unique sense and foresight to not have the opposite kind of attitude where standoffish, everything close to the chest. They were very open. They were we're going to share, we're going to talk. How do we do this? And when you have that confidence in someone, then you're willing to say, take a risk on this, because now that risk is outweighed by the reward.
Would they genuinely take your ideas and use them?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's really important.
Yeah, they would. Right. They would, for sure. Especially within my four walls of the gym. things that they're not on site on. They didn't have the resources to send people to go look at, in Indiana,
right.
So their resources are so limited too. So they in a sense, sometimes had to really be relying on those franchisees to make the right decisions. So that was unique,
Sure. Can we talk about some of those decisions? Because I'd like to get a little granular now, is how you chose a site. What pro forma did you use before you opened your doors, right? Before you spent a dime on a site, and then how you measured success at that location.
Yeah. So location for me was paramount. It was really important for me wherever I was to get the best possible location I can get. Say location.
Right.
It's used a lot, but it's true. Right. And that for us, it was very important for that. What is that drive-by traffic on the intersection that I'm in? It was a critical component for me. How many cars are passing by each day, and when is that happening? So that was one of the key things. And then I look at a population ring. So a population ring within a mile all the way up to 3, sometimes 5, depending on the locale.
Is that kind of the max that someone would drive to your site, 5 miles?
Depending on if it's like an ancillary market where it's a one-off location, no, could be up to 20-minute drive time.
Right.
That probably would be the max that I've looked at, as I remember, in the gyms I've opened.
Then people lose like interest. They're like, I'm not going. It's 21 minutes.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's when we would find out. We'd find out what is that critical, pivotal point where they say no and yes,
Right.
So I would look at that as a big component. And then anchors, what other anchors are around, who's coming to that center. So it was really important for the moms, right? The moms and the dads, and where does their pattern go? Where's their traffic going? Are they going to the supermarket? An anchor, I try and get an anchor at supermarket a lot, or Walmart, something, they're going 2 or 3 times a week. So if they're there 2 or 3 times a week, it makes it really convenient and justifiable to say, I'm going to have a Planet membership and be able to use it.
Right. And so what about income? Like, would you look at someone's income?
Yeah.
Right.
But believe it or not, it wasn't, back then, everyone took the very wealthy areas.
That's right.
So
because they charge more.
That, right. But they thought that, we thought initially early on that it wouldn't work in lower income models, right? Because the disposable income would be lower. So with that, it wouldn't work. I came from a lower income background where I grew up. That's all I was used to. So my gym was there. I knew it would work in my eyes,
right?
In theory, I was like, why wouldn't it? It doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't it work?
Right.
So I actually took the lowest income area of Indianapolis relative to the population, right? And it ended up working out just fine. So, and the other thing, my earlier point of our membership base, if it's 85% of the population, it has to work.
Right. Right.
And it was almost like, am I missing something? Why wouldn't? You're going to get a certain amount of numbers based on just certain population.
Sure.
So I went with that. That was my particular theory and thesis, and it worked out.
Wow. So, we own buildings all over the country. We talk to our tenants, which a lot of landlords don't do, right? They're just like, here's the piece of paper and do what the piece of paper says, right? Right. But, like we'll fly to corporate headquarters. We'll speak to the local manager of one of our locations. So like we own some Starbucks locations and we know the local manager's names and like, hey, Betty, nice to see you again. How are things here? And she'll say like, well, there's a drain that's not working or something like that. And like, how's the store doing? It's doing great. What, you said you look for grocery. Would you ever have any like specific tenants that you say like, if we could be next to X tenant or tenants, because our tenants say like, hey, we're looking for new locations and we'd love to be next to, right? Something.
Yeah, no, it was Dollar Tree, Dollar General, 2 good ones. Walmart anchor for sure. Starbucks anchor would be great. Yep.
Right.
And grocery.
Right. They spend $10 on you per month, and they spend $10 per coffee.
Right.
For one visit.
It makes sense that they would be okay with that.
That's right.
Those would be the kind of the main ones that and the Kohl's, so the Macy's Kohl's as well. Obviously it's dynamics changed since then, but back then that was definitely a good anchor for us.
Wow, you're being such a gentleman right now. Like dynamics change. Like Macy's isn't in business anymore. Right? Right.
It's a big sale down the road, by the way.
Right. That's really funny. Okay, so you pick your location because it's a lot of demographic stuff and it's a lot of traffic and what we would consider. We do a lot of that in our underwriting before we even contemplate making an offer on something. Like we always look at something as if, can this tenant survive in their current location? And the answer has to be yes for us. But let's say the world changes like it did in 2020 and all of a sudden everyone's underwriting doesn't work anymore, right? Like and all of a sudden you're like, can it work for another tenant? Right? And so when you go into the like financial underwriting for your locations, that's a little bit different than just choosing the location because you need to have some understanding of how much money you're going to make there, right? And can you talk us through that portion of things?
Yeah, so we'd pro forma everything out from the hard costs, which the line item is going to be the rent, and then labor underneath that. Those are pretty fixed costs as we can put in there and say, all right, this is the two big buckets. Then the unknowns is going to be what that membership base is going to be, and pro formaing how many members we'll have before we open. And then at a maturity date in the future, 18 months and 3 years. And then pro forma it out there. And then that back into all the
expenses. Yeah. Your CapEx.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And would there be a percentage? Do you know where I'm going with this? Okay.
Rent to income.
Go ahead. I don't even have to start. Yeah. Is that would there? What was your number?
Yeah, we were in that 20% range, 18 to 20%.
Okay.
Of revenue, gross revenue.
Okay.
So that would be a good number. Sometimes we go up to that 28%, depending on the location, and it might be an A space where it's a very tight market to find a location. So I'd say in that range, that 10-point range is a good number.
See, that number right there is gold for a landlord. Like for them to have an understanding of where you are profitable and sustainable to be their tenant is 20 to 28%, right? Did I
go down as low as 18, say
18 to 28%?
Yeah.
You can survive. Well, depending on what the rent is, but you can survive kind of forever.
Yeah.
In that scenario.
Yep.
And that's a really big deal for someone like me. Because a lot of times we don't know the sales of something, and you can estimate, like some old time real estate people would tell me like, yeah, we used to sit in the parking lot and count how many people visited the day. And then we'd back into it and we'd do that for a week. And then we'd know what their sales were, right? I'm like, okay, I can't do that.
Yeah. It's somewhat time constrained.
Right. But this is really interesting to hear. I'll give you some feedback. The vast majority of retail investors, if you had a single tenant building, would say that you would have to be at 8% or less to be sustainable. And you're throwing that out the window. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely higher depending on the location, and depending on the revenue that specific location. So if I can think back to about 100 locations,
you just blew my next thing. All right, but go ahead.
I was going to say, I wish I remembered the numbers. I wish I remember the numbers of the 100 and blend it down. But those one-offs,
those are home run deals.
Yeah, home run deals.
Right.
I know I've gone up into the lower.
Right.
But not much higher.
So you were really comfortable signing a lease if your pro forma showed 25%, 20%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I would say that the vast majority of people in my industry would think that was unsustainable because they feel like it has to be in that single digit range. And that would be like for a restaurant, whether it's a national brand or not. And you're just throwing that out the window, which is wonderful because now you're changing the way people will think about their retail investments, and then being comfortable, taking someone who's making 20, has a revenue to sales revenue to sales ratio, no, revenue to expense ratio of 20%. That's very different.
Yeah, I mean, that location has to be a stellar location for that, and we just caveat that, right? So if a revenue, if the location's doing 2.5 million at 10%, we're at 250,000 a year on that, right? So that's a good number. We'll go up higher than that based on if it's location specific. Is it a tight market? Is it the absolute best location? Could we exceed revenue at that location that, go above and beyond what we originally pro forma? So a lot of those things would factor in for the higher percentage rent numbers. But
so you blew the big surprise. You got to 100 locations. Right. All right. So now everyone's saying that a New York City cop had 100 locations. Were you one of the largest franchisees? The largest?
Back and forth. Yeah, I would go back and forth.
Right.
We'd start growing. But yeah, we were the largest at one point, second, third, and then
but it requires a lot of capital to get to 100. And like you said, you're not afraid of debt as long as it works, right? So how did you get from 1 to 100? You went from 1 to 10 because you bought the rights, but you needed capital in some capacity to get to 100. So what was that inflection point? How many sites did you have when you're doing it on your own, using your own signature, your own bank debt, your own equity, until you got to the point where you're like, all right, this is bigger than me now?
Yeah, I got to the point where I was at 13 locations. So I ended up buying the rights to 20 and building out to 13. And then I got approached by a private equity company and decided to partner with them. This is back, 7, 8 years now ago, something like that. Back when we still were able to, and then one of the main reasons I did it at that time was to be able to grow faster from an acquisition standpoint. So a lot of it was organic, but most of it was acquisitions and add-ons that we were able to do through securing capital along with the private equity company. So that was the major reason for that.
Did you know what private equity was when they first approached you?
I did, just because it was in the system already.
I see.
It was part of I was pretty. Yeah, it was very minimal. There was only one person in the system at the time for private equity, so it was right in the beginning of it. So that's when I thought it was a good time to be able to do it. Then to be able to then acquire and start growing a lot at a faster pace, and then also be able to purchase other greenfield territories. That was still open at the time to be able to fold them in. So my concern was waiting another 3-4 years, then less greenfield, less acquisition opportunities, higher costs for multiples, going up to purchase franchisees. So I thought it was the right time for me back then.
Were you surprised by some of their terms?
On the debt side?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's
You just take a big gulp. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was like, oh, good. My name's not the only one on this one. All right.
That's so great. So they approach you and you had 13 sites, and are they telling you how they're raising their capital to provide to you? Are they explaining that process to you at all?
I was definitely knew all before we partnered what it would look like going forward. Then it was just a matter of, what terms and what banks and what, institutions would, back us and go behind us.
And what year was that when you started?
2018.
So
17. That was 17, 18. Yeah.
You were at it alone. I hate to put it that way.
I know.
I'm so sorry.
You were alone.
You were a sole proprietor.
Exactly.
For 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
For 15 years.
Yeah.
And private equity approached you because they had probably targeted fitness, and they probably targeted your concept, your brand, right? And then they found someone who they could partner with, and you subsequently agreed to partner with them. And so you went from 13 to 100 in a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah. So it was 17. So another 7 years after that. Yeah. Just about 100.
So how does it feel being a CEO of a rapidly expanding company like that?
It was great. I really enjoyed it. It was gratifying on many levels. The people aspect, the culture building, the
Mm-hmm.
leadership opportunities for others that came about because of the rapid growth.
Mm-hmm.
That changed a lot of lives that wouldn't have been changed that dramatically or that quickly
Mm-hmm.
because of that. So it was a snowball effect for so many people, not just me, which
Mm-hmm.
is which was extremely gratifying. Extremely, felt really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Purposeful.
Purposeful, for
Yeah.
sure. Very
Good.
purposeful.
And I think that's what you were alluding to when we first started our conversation, when we decided that you were going too deep too early, right?
Right.
Right.
Typical. We jump in the deep end. Toe in the water, no. Jump in the deep end.
But you found your purpose. You found your company's purpose.
Yeah.
And how did you kind of start building your infrastructure? You're like, oh, I have 13 locations and we're going to grow this. We have PE money. Like PE money is there to grow this. And all of a sudden you have to build a big team. Was that daunting?
No, it was exciting.
Yeah.
It was exciting. It wasn't, it was what I was doing up to that point. So it wasn't much different. It was just different roles being layered in to facilitate and facilitate the new growth that was to come. So doing it on the come and kind of building that in the back of the house, for that next exit and for that rapid growth. So when opportunity does come up, we're ready for it, so it was that kind of mindset. So it was great. It was a great experience from that standpoint.
I love it. We're completely in the back room, New York, poker tables. We have the VIG on the come, on the finger. That's another one, right? What are some other good ones?
Oh, geez. They just come out.
This is great. This is so funny. But like everyone knows what those mean, right? So that's so great. So of course, a giant success. And let's ruin another surprise. You sold the company. You sold your 100 locations. Private equity is kind of built for that. You were probably within that time window that they wanted, right? Because they're usually 3 to 7 years, right?
Yeah,
so they were 7 years,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Were they giving you any pressure, like, hey, it's time to sell?
No, we had a lot of struggles from COVID. So we were almost sold probably 4 years before this because COVID hit. And so we struggled through that as far as kind of, locations and just getting through the whole COVID thing.
Sure.
So we weren't really in a sell mode, and we were in a kind of sustain. How do we build? How do we kind of get through this and, strong? So it was a whole different way of managing, different way of running a company. So it was very interesting.
I mean, you're not getting deep on any of this, like, so the private equity firms in about 3 years, pandemic starts, and they're like, okay, we can't do anything now. There's no buyers, right?
Yeah, everything changed.
Right.
Yeah, we literally had paper signed before March of 20 to sell at that point. We were that far along in the sale process from when I first sold. And then COVID happened, and then that changed the world as we know it back then. But again, great things come out of not so great things. So,
for sure. So they were in it 4 more years.
4 more years.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, 100's the magic number.
Yeah.
It's time to go.
Yeah, exactly. At
Right.
that point, then we knew it was the right time. The market settled. Finance was obviously, as so different. Changed that whole lending climate changed so much. So it became the right time again.
Yeah,
and we were like, where's the next thing? What are we getting now? World catastrophe about to come.
Right. Yeah. For us, it's they're closing U.S. government occupied buildings, right? Because we own some building,
right.
and so now we have mostly DoD occupied buildings. So there's a little disclaimer there. But that was the next thing that no one ever thought would happen, right? If you have the government, U.S. government as your tenant, and then all of a sudden they're like, and we're not your tenant anymore. By the way. So how did it feel when you and the private equity firm, your partner, were preparing for the sale. Did you feel like you had accomplished what you wanted to in your career? What was the mindset of that?
Yeah, I did. I felt like it was a great inflection point again
Mm-hmm.
to kind of pivot and close the page, but not the chapter or the book.
Mm-hmm.
And what's that now? What eventually will be next?
Mm-hmm.
So I was never a big proponent of staying with one thing forever. It could be great to do that,
Right.
but I'd like to kind of be very nimble, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 take opportunities as they come, and assess it both from a financial standpoint, but also a personal standpoint. Where am I in my life journey right now, from a
Mm-hmm.
family standpoint, a
Mm-hmm.
work balance standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of blending them all together, and then coming up with that decision. What's next?
Yeah.
And that's how this decision to sell came from.
So you're one of the most optimistic people I know. We haven't talked about
Mhm.
any of your struggles, any of your challenges. Where in this 32 years of fitness, with a little school break in between there, right? Did you ever say like, man, this is a lot?
Oof. Probably through COVID. I'd say
Mm-hmm.
COVID was a very defining moment from many standpoints.
Mm-hmm.
Having a partner,
Mm-hmm.
the struggle from that standpoint of the needing to sell or wanting to sell, and being a bad time now because of COVID. Seeing people in different lights as different economic change, and how does that change the relationship.
You're being
So
a diplomat right here.
Yes.
Like, whoa, that was so nice. Right.
No, it's not easy.
Let
Partnerships
me,
are not easy. So
that's right.
that would be a struggle. The
Mm-hmm.
partnership piece is a very big struggle.
Mm-hmm.
It's super important to remain honorable,
Mm-hmm.
and very important to keep a very high level of integrity as you go through whatever changes they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes that doesn't happen in business.
Mm-hmm.
So that became a little bit of a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
getting through, sometimes goals aren't aligned all the time at the right moment.
So how do you
And
get through that?
communication's a huge part.
Mm-hmm.
I think being above board with everything is a very, very integral part. And that no matter what the struggle or challenge is how do you both rise above it, where it helps you're looking out for the other person, and not, again, just me kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Creating that win-win on both sides, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what, even if you both don't get what you want,
Mm-hmm.
or it's not the ideal situation that you envisioned. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't have that alignment, then it becomes a very deep struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You need that alignment, for it to flourish, and for it to get through, the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's like easier said than done.
it is.
And I'm not apologizing because like you're kind of watering down the emotion
Mhm.
that goes into those really challenging
Mhm.
periods of any partnership, right? It's just hard. It's hard to use your word on be honorable. No, it's not hard to be honorable. It's easy to be honorable. It's hard to have those conversations with honor, right?
It is.
And that is, I think, what a lot of people struggle with, because everyone starts becoming fearful. When things go south, fear kind of embeds everyone's persona at that time. And what do? Kind of, I always say, like, anger is fear. Like, you're a very calm person. You don't seem to be fearful, right? Or need to express your fear in anger. But I'm sure you've experienced that in your career towards you. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's I think it's the old adage that it's not what happens to you, what happens for you. So it's kind of a perception thing. So I've always been the mindset of, it's not happening to me, it's happening for me, and how do I now respond to that in a way that is the most productive way. Unfortunately, you have other people, sometimes the other party doesn't view that. And that's some of the situations I ran into with, the lack of integrity with certain people, lack of honorability with certain people, Greed comes into it too. You get people that just change over time, and greed is it can be a vicious thing.
That's right.
And so working through those, even though it was a struggle and a tough time to be able to get through it all, and rise above it, I look at it as, again, like we said earlier, with the other kind of examples. I look at those experiences as what something in the future happens because of that. That's going to put you in a place that you probably wouldn't have been in because you had that experience. And that's how I kind of look at it and view it to make it, the right way. That's how I look at things. I've always looked at things that way,
Sure.
But I think it's important not to sugarcoat, business isn't easy. People aren't easy. And when you marry the two, it can be very difficult,
right?
But that's the only way to get better.
It's exactly
you have to
right.
go through those struggles. Those are very important struggles. I look at it and look back. Very important struggles to go through. Whether I'm helping somebody else that might be going through the same thing now, I've helped quite a few people since a lot of my experiences, because they'll face certain things or have faced similar things, or certain people, unfortunately, that act in a certain way that they shouldn't act. How do you deal with it? Sometimes it's a hard thing to do without, having it. That's why it's so important to have that network. And I can't stress that enough. I think to have that network of people, you can pick up the phone and say, hey, this is going on. What do you think? Have you ever had this happen? Or give me some advice. And maybe that's definitely been a reason I've had a lot of stuff happen to me in the past, because I can now impart that on other people. And that may be one of the reasons why you go through certain things.
Yeah.
So I think look how you look at it, the lens you look at that through means everything.
Yeah. That's interesting. Insightful for sure. The one thing that we haven't talked about yet is your real estate ownership. Like one thing that I've always experienced when I work with franchisees and kind of discuss like where they operate and how they determine whether or not they should own their locations. And full disclosure to our listeners, you and I have had this conversation already on the golf course, right? Cliche, but golf course discussions.
Exactly.
And you said to me something to the effect of, I wish I bought all my buildings, or I wish most of my buildings, something like that. And what did you use as a determining factor of whether or not you should have owned what you occupied?
So I look at the leases. I realized how expensive a lot of the leases were, per year, per month, and over a course of a 10-year or sometimes a 15-year lease period. So looking at that cost of what I'm spending there versus actually buying a center or a single unit space, what that difference was. And then performing that over time, the increase in property value over that same period, combined with, most cases, a lower monthly mortgage, versus the rent.
Right.
And you combine those two, and it was just a no-brainer. It made, assuming the underlying business, of course, does well. And that you need that to support it, especially if it's a single use tenant. But if that penciled, it made, then I just started buying one after the other and didn't stop, until I partnered with private equity. And then for some reason it stopped then. I should have bought more, but that was a very good parallel wealth creation path that, I'm super happy I did, so that's how I looked at it from a comparison side by side kind of standpoint. What is that rent, and am I able to purchase it? Is this space to purchase or not?
That's right. There's so many examples of different philosophies of real estate ownership for any company. We'll keep it at retail. So like Starbucks is a great example where they don't want to spend a dime on real estate for the most part. They want the rent. They don't want to spend $2 to $4 million to build a building. They want someone else to spend that money, and then they just pay $200,000 in rent, something like that. And then Costco is the exact opposite. They're like, no, we are going to incur all the expense to build that. And the shareholders are like, well, why? Like, why are you spending, $20 million on a building? You can do that, use that in your operations and get such a better return on that $20 million. And Costco just says, like, just cost less. Right. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, they're right. This is great. Mike, I am so excited that we finally did this. It's a real treat for me to kind of hear your story, start from 0, get to 100, which is such a round number. Like,
yeah.
You know?
Right.
And now that you're a professional amateur golfer as your profession, this is a lot of fun for me to, kind of get to hear what your path is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was an honor for me to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.